On the panel, we have Liddy Nakpil, who will be representing the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice, Jacobo Ojoron from Climate Action Network International, Gina Cortez, representing the Women and Gender constituency, Leo Kick, representing Youngo, and Jeremy Anderson, representing the trade unions. Over to Liddy.
Good morning. I think the biggest fight that we have here at COP29 is about climate finance. That is not to say that all the other issues are not as important, but this COP is expected to deliver a clear goal on climate finance. But this fight didn't start here or just a few months ago or last year at the start of the NCQG process. We have been fighting this fight for decades because climate finance was identified as very key at the beginning when the convention was adopted in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, where it is very clear that climate finance is an obligation of developed country parties to developing countries because of their historical role in bringing about the crisis that we are facing now, an existential crisis of climate change. But developing country parties have been confusing and distracting us from the main issues of climate finance. So first, we would like to say, this is about not finance in general for climate, but the climate finance that is owed by developed country parties to the developing countries because of their historical obligations. Second, this is not aid for the Global South or for the developing countries. This is reparations for what we are owed. This is compensation for all the damages that has been historically caused and is continuing. We are not asking for aid. We're asking for what is owed us. Then we are saying this is not just for the sake of our people. Climate finance is very key to the success of stopping climate change. So this climate finance is for the sake of the whole of humanity and the whole of the planet. We also need to be very clear that this climate finance is to cover mitigation and the energy transition, that to be done in a just manner. It is to cover adaptation and building of resilience. It is to address and cover loss and damage, and it has to make sure that the cost of making it an equitable and just transition is also covered. We are not talking about billions. The $100 billion pledged in 2009 and thus far has not yet been delivered. $100 billion a year was a sick and harmful joke. This is very much like drops in an entire sea of water of needs and obligations that is owed to the South. We are talking here at least $5 trillion a year of public finance, not of the many layers that they're now talking about in the NCQG. 5 trillion is not a number we pulled out of a hat. It is based on many studies, both from governments, from the UNFCCC, from the Needs Determination Report, from countries, from their submissions to the UNFCCC, from independent studies of experts, that this is at least the minimum that would cost to cover loss and damage, adaptation, mitigation, and the cost of just transition. This is $5 trillion a year that can be raised, also because we know from many studies that this can be raised, and from our experience with previous crises, when the world's richest countries were able to raise the $5 trillion. So we're talking public finance, not just private, new and additional, and not debt creating. $5 trillion a year at the minimum. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So the repayment of this debt needs to start now. It needs to start with an agreement that we have only 10 days left to be reached. And this is what we call technically the NCQG, or we can call it as the new goal, okay? And as Liddy just said, clearly it needs to be an agreement that is setting a core of trillions, okay, on public money, mostly in grants and no loans, not on a system that is going to indebt the impoverished countries, okay, and debt more, because we, as you know, we are on this debt crisis, okay. So how is it looking? How is it looking? Because we have 10 days to go, and to be honest, it's not looking well. It's not looking well because we have the results, first of all, of the preparations that we have seen during these last months, and we've seen that richer countries have delayed all the negotiations on the strong points, okay? They haven't come clearly with a figure. They're hiding, I don't know, the envelopes, if they have any, and they are hiding the numbers which are crucial to a negotiation of a quantum, but they are also hiding the key elements on quality, as we call them, and what kind of money is going to be put on the table, how this is going to be reported. Nothing of that has been done in the preparations, and nothing on that we have seen on the Leaders Summit. We just have the leaders that have left Baku yesterday. Funny way to do this, you send the leaders, okay, and they are not accountable on what is being decided. They leave their staff, if I may call it like this, and we have not seen in their pledges, in their public statements, any mention again about the quantum. We have here blah, blah, blah about private funding, about different possibilities of raising the trillions, but on what is under their control, which is public funding, not any single commitment. And of course, we have here the impoverished countries, okay, basically making the argument on why this is needed. And the negotiations are following this track. We are 2 days now into the negotiations, and we are seeing again, okay, how no countries are giving a single, so no richer countries are giving a single figure. They are very happy to give dates, 2050, on which we are going to be net zero. And it's funny because these leaders of these countries, I mean, very few of us will be in 2050 to be accountable of this, okay? But they are not ready to give a figure to start with the negotiation on the goal. And as I said, you know, they bring the public funding into the mix, which is a big mistake because it's not under their control. And they try to add confusion, just to finish, on who should be paying this debt, okay? It is clearly a state on the Paris Agreement which are the countries that have the responsibility, the obligation to make the reparations, and yes, there is some other countries that maybe do it on voluntary basis. So as I say, let's hope that we have a ray of light in the coming days, but there is quite a lot of warning signals. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Buen día a todos. Mi nombre es Gina Cortés Valderrama, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Women and Gender constituency. For too long, climate finance has been framed as an act of benevolence from which the rich to the poor, where the colonizers are again giving the pace of what is progress, about what is development, and to streamline in that way the investments towards excessive electrification of our lives and consumption, but not really towards a life in dignity. But actually what we are facing currently is a polycrisis, is a massive destruction that is fueled by their imperialism, by their militarism, that is underpinned by centuries of colonial exploitation, completely untenable within the planetary boundaries. And this is in a context where the genocides in Palestine, Congo, and Sudan are fueled by the racism that is dressed as those geopolitical and trade interests of countries in the global north. So just let me bring some figures to contextualize this. The global military expenditure reached 2.4 trillion last year, meaning a 6.8 increase in comparison with 2022. And according to different estimates, pledges that were done at COP29 last year for the funding of the loss and damage amounted to 2.5 hours of military spending. And in the same vein, the total amount pledged at the end of last year for the Green Climate Fund is equivalent to just 2 days of military expenditure. And this is not enough. Researchers have also estimated that the emissions of the first 2 months of Israel's bombardment to Gaza approximate the equivalent of 75 coal-fired power plants operating for a year. So the Global North has sold us a narrative of a scarcity, that there is no money, that we don't have money. But let us be clear, because the money is there. The trillions that are needed are there, but they are not putting into climate action. They are now being used for murder. They are now being used for plunder and to complete the destruction, for the complete destruction of our bodies, of our livelihoods, and also of our ecosystems. So we are gathered here at COP29 at this climate conference to take a serious keys of decisions, particularly on finance, particularly on gender, on what has been framed as a COP of peace. But peace means nothing if there is not a real divestment from the military fuel and fossil fuel-based economies and those structures that keep us moving to the brink of collapse. And peace means nothing if gender equality is not at the forefront of those priorities, because it's also the Global North who owes that climate debt, and they have the obligation to pay it by providing grant support and not more loans as they have doing. Because these, again, those cycles of loans, of illegitimate debt, is disproportionately pushing women and LGBTQIGNC persons deeper into inequality, capitalist exploitation circles, particularly to those racialized, particularly those that inhabited the geographies of the South. And this required a major transformation of the financial infrastructures to halt the reproduction of capital and put the bet into dignity and a life for all. Thank you.
Good day. My name is Leonard, and I'm speaking on behalf of Yango, representing the voices of the global youth and children. And I want to take this moment to recall that for us young people, for your children, your grandchildren, and all the future generations, this discussion about the NCQG is not a technical one. It's about real livelihoods and how they are impacted by the decisions that we will reach or not reach here at COP29. So many of my friends that are here and so many of the young people in the whole world live with great anxiety about their future. We have so much insecurity because of all the disasters that we see are lined up down the road. The language of science is very clear what we have to expect in our lifetimes and the lifetimes of our children. And this insecurity is not only a great mental burden for the current generations, but already does and will even more impact the livelihoods of all people that are going to follow after us. So for us, this insecurity is something that is also connected to the agreements that we reach here, because a strong NCQG could mean that at least we know what we can rely on when things go wrong, and that we don't have to worry every day of who will pay for all the damages and all the investments needed to adapt to the climate crisis. We demand of the parties present and also the parties absent and back home that they live up to their responsibility to their children, grandchildren, and all future generations. And to realize that the impacts and the outcomes of this NCQG is not something abstract that is far down the road, but that will impact members of their family and members of their families that are still to come. For us, the question of finance is a very intergenerational issue, and it's an issue of justice, because there are those who caused those problems that we face now and those who suffer from it. And we of the Yango, we represent the voices of youth from all over the world, and we have many people that are already affected right now in their livelihoods by the climate crisis. So for us, it's very important that this NCQG also addresses the losses and damages that already occur now to our friends and their communities. We also demand that the NCQG is a rights-based NCQG, which is responsive to the needs of the most vulnerable, including of us youth. Also, we have many people that are on the forefront of climate change and have actions in their local communities, but the money that has been agreed upon already is not able to reach them. We demand that there is much better access for young people and their projects and other groups that are on the forefront of climate change to have access to the money flowing from the climate finance. And lastly, I admire my friends who come and show up here every day for the hope and the energy that they bring, because it can be quite daunting. And we call upon all the parties present and absent that they give us a reason to have hope for the future.
Kia ora koutou. I am representing the 200 million workers in the global trade union movement. And our message here is very simple. Billions of people in the global south and billions of workers are suffering the consequences of the broken promises around climate finance. So it's high time for the historic polluters to pay up, to honor their climate debt, and 5 trillion per year is the absolute minimum. We know the resources are there, but we need political leadership that involves workers and all communities. Because, and this is absolutely critical for us, climate finance is a workers' issue. Workers are facing a cocktail of climate threats on the job. Extreme heat is making working life intolerable for millions. Floods and storms are causing widespread loss and damage to vital infrastructure and also to workers' livelihoods. So the majority of workers are informal, and they have no social protection when climate disasters hit. So the NCQG must include both funding for sustainable industries that are built around decent jobs, but it must also include an ironclad commitment to labour rights. So that includes social dialogue to make sure that workers are involved in all decisions around climate finance projects, alongside human rights for women, Indigenous peoples, youth, and all groups in civil society. So that is what we mean by a just transition. And we cannot accept that increasing the quantum must be about mobilizing climate finance. We need a new paradigm that puts economic, social, and climate justice at its core. But it must start by recognizing the climate debt. We call on the global north to get real. It's time to pay up for a just transition. Kia kaha.
Thank you. Now, before we go to questions, we'll just go to the screens where today we have conducted a global action to call on global north governments and those parties who are here at COP29 to pay up. This is a cross-constituency message. It is not only happening here in Azerbaijan, we are seeing actions across the world calling for the global north to pay up, to pay their climate debt to the global south. Now we'll go to some questions. Great, we can, if you can say your name and organization, please.
Hello, I'm Alistair Thompson from Scoop Media New Zealand. There's a meeting today of the MDBs in the presidency. Do you guys have any idea of what the objectives are of that? I mean, this is about leveraging finance. So the MDB meeting today...
Sorry, can you speak a little louder? We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, here we go. So there's a meeting today, a presidency event, meeting of the vice presidents of all the world's MDBs to discuss essentially the scaling up of finance for mitigation and adaptation in particular. Do you have...
For climate action, because the two reasons. One, the business of multilateral development banks is mainly lending. So if the finance that will be mobilized by these multilateral development banks will be in the form of loans, it's really going to be spelling even greater disaster for most of the developing countries who are already saddled with many unsustainable and illegitimate debts, and now they're going to be saddled with even more loans, even though it is for good intentions for climate action. So they have to be able to mobilize the funds in some other form that doesn't add to other problems in the developing world. The second is that the MDBs, especially the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, Latin America, and Inter-Americas, have been talking about using public funds to incentivize and de-risk private investments. We're not saying that there's no role for private sector finance. There should be participation by the private sector in financing climate action. But what we're talking about here is climate finance, which is public finance that is also sorely needed if governments are to lead in the process of addressing the roots of the problem. And this is not just leaving it to the private sector and the markets. So we need public finance for governments to be able to lead and not to simply to de-risk private sector investment. So we're worried about the outcomes of this kind of meeting if it's going to just repeat this mantra that it's private sector and that the multilateral development banks will mobilize the public funds to incentivize and de-risk the private sector.
If I may add to what just Lydie said, on top of it, and you said on the question, the discussion is, on funding for mitigation and adaptation. They are forgetting loss and damage, which is also crucial, okay, for this discussion, okay? How can you make loans for loss and damage? Okay, it is reparation on what has happened because the development in the north, okay? So it's no way that you can match that with a development bank. Loss and damage sub-goal into the NCQG is crucial for us.
Any further questions? Second row, please.
Hello, my name is Maximiliano Manzoni from Consenso in Paraguay, and I have a small question about the role of Article 6 on the discussion around finance. After the consensus reached on Article 6.4, there will be some talks about we will cheapen NDCs, and also there will be a new innovative flow of finance, especially from the developing countries to the developing countries. So I will ask for your opinion on those discussions.
So again, this is a small curtain, okay? So carbon markets cannot be a source of funding, okay, for the new goal, okay? Of course, I mean, there is a needed discussion on how we are going to, or how it needs to be regulated, the carbon markets. But the linkage of a carbon market under Article 6 with the NCQG is, again, another layer of confusion.
And this is not only a question that is relevant for the finance aspect, but also is very detrimental in terms of human rights. And we are moving into COP30 that is going to be in Brazil and in Latin America. For instance, we see as well the risk of how these carbon mechanisms are going to keep on fueling the destruction system. It's not about innovating. There's nothing innovating about reproducing the same cycles of depredation, extraction, and destruction in the territories, particularly by those systems that we have seen that have failed, that do not have the safeguards that are needed, and that are also not respecting the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous communities and also people on the ground. So this is very much a threat that we have seen happening as well in this COP.
Any final question? Gentleman in the front row.
My question is, because there's a many time
Sorry, could you say your name and organization?
My name is Saeed Baloch. I'm a General Secretary of Pakistan Fisher Folk Forum, is a grassroots organization of fishers. So my question, the same about Article 6, but about the loss and damage. Does there is any mechanism the community directly get the loss and damage support, or direct it go to the government? Because there's a lot of experience previously, no government go to the directly community to help them in even individual or families or community.
So one of the very important victories we've won in the last few years is that of the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund. But the struggle continues because the Loss and Damage Fund has just been set up. They're at their third board meeting coming up. And that means they're still setting up the different policies and modalities for access, for disbursement, and how it will affect communities that have to be the main beneficiaries of this fund. So we cannot say as of yet now how the direct access can be done, because that is still something of a fight that we have, that we are waging and engaging with the Loss and Damage Fund. So let's all join up together so that we can ensure that whatever money will be there, which is very small, that's the problem, will directly go to communities who actually need the money.
If I could add to that, direct access for loss and damage is a critical issue for informal workers. So in Pakistan, for example, the informal baggage handlers have no social protection after that. So this is a critical issue for workers as well.
And that concludes our Pay Up press conference. Our speakers will be available outside the room for a little while if you have any further questions. Thank you very much. It's time for the Global North to pay up.